The world had forgotten him. Somewhere, in a forgotten corner of a quiet town, behind a house that no one cared about, a dog lay in the dirt, chained to the same post where he had been for years. No one remembered the first day the chain had been fastened around his neck. Not even him. His world was small, no larger than the few feet of ground the rusted chain allowed him to move. The seasons had changed. Summer had burned the earth beneath his paws, winter had covered him in frost, but nothing else had. No hand had reached for him in kindness. No voice had called his name, because he did not have one. To the world, he did not exist. And so, he lay there, alone, forgotten, waiting. For what? He did not know. For the sun to set. For another night to pass. For something, anything, to change. His body had grown around the chain. The metal links had rubbed his fur away in places, leaving raw, pink skin beneath. The weight of it had left deep indentations where the collar met his neck, pressing against bone. He could not remember what it felt like to run, or to be free, or to be anything more than a shadow in the dirt. His ribs pressed against his skin, sharp and visible beneath a dull coat that had once, long ago, been thick and strong. His water bucket had turned green. His food bowl had been empty for days. But hunger was no longer something he fought against. He had learned that it was just another part of life. Another part of being forgotten. The world around him had always been the same. The wind rustling through brittle weeds. The distant hum of passing cars. But today, there was something different. Footsteps. Soft. Hesitant. A presence. He lifted his head. It was difficult. His muscles were weak, stiff from being curled in the same position for too long. His ears twitched at the sound. His dull, tired eyes struggled to focus. And then, a shadow fell over him. Someone had stopped. Someone had seen him. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, there was hope. Her name was Emily. She had been driving home, following the same road she always took, past the same houses she had seen 100 times before. But today, something caught her eye. At first, it looked like nothing, just a dark shape in the dirt, barely moving. It could have been anything. But something told her to look again. And when she did, her breath caught in her throat. A dog. Chained. Alone. Barely alive. The sight sent a jolt through her chest. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. She knew she should keep driving. She told herself there was nothing she could do. But her heart whispered otherwise. And so, she stopped. Emily stepped out of her car, gravel crunching beneath her feet. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. The house looked abandoned, windows boarded, weeds creeping up the foundation. And yet, there he was. A dog that should not have still been alive. His body was motionless, ribs rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. But his eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, were open. Watching. Waiting. Emily swallowed. Her hands trembled as she took a careful step forward. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. "Can you hear me?" His ears twitched. She knelt down, heart pounding. He did not move toward her. He did not react at all. But he was breathing. And that meant one thing. It was not too late. Emily knew what she had to do. She could not walk away. Not from this. But she also knew that saving him would not be easy. The chain was thick, rusted, wrapped tightly around a wooden post. The skin beneath it was raw, irritated from years of pressure. She had no bolt cutters. No tools. Just a desperate need to help. She reached into her bag, pulling out a bottle of water. Unscrewing the cap, she poured a small amount into her palm and held it out. "Come on, buddy," she urged softly. The dog hesitated. For a moment, she thought he would ignore her. But then, slowly, weakly, he moved. His tongue flicked out, lapping at the water poured in her hand. Emily's throat tightened. "That's it," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore." And in that moment, she made a silent promise. She was going to save him. No matter what it took. Emily reached for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed the number for animal rescue. "I found a dog. He's chained. He's starving." The voice on the other end sighed. "We'll send someone. But cases like this, it takes time." Time. A word that meant nothing to the world but meant everything to him. Because time had already taken too much from him. Emily gritted her teeth. She was not going to wait. She was going to fight. She turned back to the dog, her mind racing. "Hold on, buddy," she murmured. "I'm getting you out of here." And in that moment, the moment everything changed, the dog lifted his head just slightly. His eyes met hers. And for the first time in what must have been years, there was hope. He had been forgotten, left to rot in the dirt, his life measured only in the weight of his chain. But Emily had stopped. And because of that, his story was not over yet. Not even close. What happens next will shock you. Because miracles, they happen when someone decides to care. Stay with me until the end of this story, because you are not ready for what comes next. Emily crouched beside the dog, her heart pounding. She could see it now, the rusted chain biting deep into his fur, pressing against his thin, fragile neck. His body was weak, every rib visible beneath his dull coat. His fur, once thick and strong, had turned patchy and dry from years of neglect. His paws were cracked, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. She reached out slowly, her fingers hovering over his head. He flinched. Emily's chest tightened. "How long have you been afraid of a gentle touch?" she whispered. He did not know she was here to help. He only knew that hand had never been kind to him. Her voice softened. "It's okay, buddy. I won't hurt you." He stared at her, unmoving. And for a long, painful moment, he did not trust her. But he was listening. That was a start. Emily's hand shook as she grabbed her phone. She dialed the number for the local animal rescue. "There's a dog. He's been chained up for years. He's starving. He's weak. He needs help." The voice on the other end sighed. "We'll send someone to check it out." "No," Emily said, her voice firm. "You don't understand. He doesn't have time." Another sigh. "I know cases like this take time, but we need to follow protocol. He won't make it if we wait." There was silence on the line. Then, "We'll try to send someone soon." But soon was not good enough. Emily made a decision. She was not leaving without him. The dog's eyes followed her as she stood. His ears twitched as she took a step toward the chain, assessing it. Rusted. Heavy. Wrapped tightly around the base of an old wooden post. It had been there for years. So had he. She bent down, gripping the chain near his collar, testing its strength. The dog growled. Low. Weak. A warning. Emily froze. "I know you're scared," she murmured. "I would be too." She let go, raising her hands to show she meant no harm. He watched her, wary but curious. For years, no one had tried to help him. And now, someone had. But trust was not built in a moment. It was built in patience. And Emily was not going anywhere. Emily reached into her bag, pulling out a small sandwich. It was not much, but it was more than he had been given in days. She unwrapped it, breaking off a piece of soft bread, and placed it on the ground near him. He sniffed. But he did not move. He was starving, but he had also learned that food could come with consequences. Emily sat down. Right there. In the dirt. She did not rush him. She just waited. Minutes passed. Then, a slow, hesitant movement. The dog inched forward. His nose twitched, his ribs rising and falling as he took a shaky breath. And then, he ate. A small piece. Just a bite. But it was the first thing he had taken from a human in years. And Emily felt tears burn at the corners of her eyes. "That's it, buddy," she whispered. "I've got you now." The moment that changed everything. She could not do this alone. Emily called her friend, Mark, a volunteer at a nearby rescue. "Bring bolt cutters." He arrived an hour later, his truck kicking up dust as he parked near the abandoned house. He took one look at the dog and cursed under his breath. "Who does this?" he muttered, kneeling beside Emily. She had no answer, but they had a job to do. Mark pulled out the bolt cutters, positioning them around the thickest part of the chain. "Hold him still," he told Emily. She swallowed. He had barely let her touch him, but she had to try. She placed one trembling hand on his head. The dog tensed. She whispered, "It's okay. You're okay." And in that moment, he stayed still. Mark squeezed the cutters. With a loud snap, the chain broke. It fell to the ground with a metallic clang. The dog did not move. He stood frozen. He had been chained for so long, he did not know what to do without it. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. "You're free, buddy," she said softly. But he did not understand what freedom meant. Not yet. The first step to a new life. The dog did not run. He did not even step forward. He just stood there, confused. Emily tugged gently on the leash they had clipped onto a new collar. "Come on, boy." He looked at her. He looked at the open yard. Then, he took one step. Just one. And then another. And then, for the first time in years, he walked. It was slow. Shaky. But it was freedom. And Emily let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The first few days were hard. Emily took him home, but trust was not immediate. He would flinch at sudden movements. He would whimper in his sleep. He would sit by the door, as if waiting for someone to put the chain back on. But day by day, he changed. His ribs became less visible. His fur grew soft again. And then, one morning, he wagged his tail. Not much. Just a little. But it was everything. Emily sat beside him, watching as he rested his head on her knee. "You need a name, don't you?" she murmured. She thought for a moment. Then, she smiled. Chance. Because that's what he had been given. And he had taken it. Chance was no longer a forgotten dog chained to a post. He was a dog who ran in open fields. A dog who knew what love felt like. A dog who would never be alone again. Because Emily had stopped. She had seen him. And she had given him the life he had always deserved. One moment. One decision. One person stopping. That is all it takes to change a life. How many others are still waiting? How many more chains need to be broken? If you see something, stop. Because kindness? It is the miracle they are waiting for. Chance's first night in Emily's home was one of quiet uncertainty. He had spent years sleeping on the cold, hard dirt. His body curled into itself for warmth. The concept of a soft bed was foreign to him. Emily had set up a corner in her living room. A thick dog bed, a warm blanket, a bowl of clean water. But Chance did not know it was for him. At first, he paced. Back and forth, his paws moving in slow, uncertain steps. His eyes flickered to the door, his posture stiff, as if expecting someone to come and put the chain back on. Emily watched from the couch, her heart aching. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," she whispered. But he did not understand that yet. She sat with him for hours, waiting. And then, just before dawn, Chance curled up on the floor, beside the bed, but not on it. It was not trust. Not yet. But it was a start. The days that followed were full of small victories. The first time he ate from his bowl without hesitation. The first time he let Emily brush the knots from his fur without pulling away. The first time he closed his eyes and slept without constantly jolting awake. But there were still moments of fear. A door slamming in the distance would make him flinch. A man's voice on the television would make him lower his head, shrinking into himself. The past had left its mark. Emily understood that healing was not just physical. It would take time. And she would give him all the time he needed. Because he deserved it. A week passed before Emily decided it was time. She held the leash loosely in her hand, kneeling beside him. "Come on, Chance. Let's go for a walk." His ears twitched. His eyes flickered between the door and her face. She could see the hesitation. For years, the only thing that had connected him to people was a chain. Now, she was offering him something else. A choice. For a moment, he did not move. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. Emily's breath caught. She opened the door. And for the first time in his life, Chance walked outside, unchained. His paws touched the pavement, his head lifted. The world was bigger than the few feet of dirt he had known. And this time, he was free to explore it. Their first trip to the park was quiet. Chance walked beside Emily, not ahead, not behind. Not pulling, not resisting. Just with her. The grass was soft beneath his paws, a feeling he had never known. The sun warmed his fur. And then, something incredible happened. A group of dogs ran past, chasing each other, barking, tails wagging. Chance froze. His body tensed, his eyes wide. Emily crouched beside him. "It's okay," she said gently. He looked at her. Then, at them. And then, for the first time since she had found him, his tail moved. Not much. Just a little. A slow, cautious wag. But it was everything. That night, Emily sat on the couch, watching as Chance curled up on the floor. She sighed. He still refused to sleep on the dog bed. But that was okay. "Maybe one day," she whispered. She turned off the light and made her way to her room. And just as she was about to close the door, she heard it. Soft footsteps. Slow. Hesitant. She turned around. And her heart caught in her throat. Chance was standing at her doorway. His head was slightly lowered, his ears relaxed. Waiting. Emily knelt down, holding out her hand. "You want to stay with me?" she asked softly. He took a step forward. And then another. Until he laid down. Not on the floor, but on the bed. The one she had set out for him on that first night. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. She reached out, running her fingers gently over his fur. "Good boy, Chance," she whispered. And for the first time since she had rescued him, Chance closed his eyes and slept without fear. Weeks passed, then months. And with each passing day, Chance became the dog he was always meant to be. His fur grew back, thick and healthy. His ribs were no longer visible. His eyes, once hollow and empty, were full of life. He learned how to play, how to wag his tail without fear, how to trust. He learned that the world was not just a place of pain and chains. It was a place of grass and sun and warm hands that scratched behind his ears. A place where voices meant kindness, not cruelty. A place where he belonged. One night, Emily sat outside, watching as Chance lay beside her on the porch. The same sky stretched above them. The same world that had once left him forgotten. But now, everything was different. She reached over, ruffling the fur on his neck. He leaned into her touch. "You were supposed to die in that yard," she whispered. Chance's ears twitched. He did not understand her words. But he understood her voice. The softness in it. The love. "But you didn't," she continued, a small smile on her lips. "Because I stopped. Because I saw you." He sighed, resting his head on her lap. Emily blinked away the tears. "And now, buddy, you're home." This is not just Chance's story. This is the story of thousands of dogs still waiting. Still chained in forgotten yards. Still hoping that someone will stop. Emily could have kept driving. She could have told herself it was not her problem. But she did not. She stopped. And because of that, Chance is alive. Chance is free. How many more are still waiting? How many more chains need to be broken? If you see something, stop. Because kindness? It is the miracle they are waiting for. If this story touched your heart, share it. Let more people see the power of stopping. Like, comment, and subscribe to help us tell more stories like this. Stories of hope, of second chances, of miracles that happen when someone chooses to care. Because the truth is, the next chance is still out there. Waiting. Hoping. Fighting to survive. And maybe, just maybe, they are waiting for you.